Welcome to Getting Rich Together, the show for successful women who are looking to take their financial futures to the next level. I'm your host, Shama Bunton. When I started my wealth building journey, nobody knocked on my door to give me all the answers. So I want to talk to the experts who've done it and bring the answers to you so we can discover the right opportunities that will help us achieve the financial futures we've always dreamed of, together, and have fun doing it. So let's dive into this episode and start getting rich together. I am here today with the prolific Dee Poku. Dee, you are known within so many women's communities as someone who is spearheading the future of what success looks like for women, the future of community, the future of what it means to build powerful homes, powerful lives, to be independent. Before spearheading this, you were also building this incredible career in entertainment. I am so excited to get to have you here on Getting Rich Together. Thank you so much for being here.
I am thrilled to be here. I love this topic. I think it's so important to talk about wealth and specifically in relation to women. I think we are leaving billions of dollars on the table collectively. And I feel like the only way we're going to plug that gap is by sharing that knowledge and information with one another.
Wonderful. So let's jump into the very beginning. You know, most of our money journeys and money stories, they happen when we're very young and we don't even realize that they're happening around us. So Dee, take us back to what it was like to be you at the age of 5 to 12 years old. Where were you? What was money like around you? What was life like?
Wow. I grew up in the UK. I had no sense of money, particularly in the early years. I was living in Ghana when my understanding of money scarcity took shape. And it's not as if we were particularly sort of rich or anything like that, but we had sort of a good life, home, just the sort of basics that we all sort of aspire to. When my parents decided to move our family back to Ghana, I began to understand wealth inequity in the world, that some places have more and got to take some things for granted and other places did not. And so I saw real poverty and affluence. There's a huge wealth divide, certainly in Ghana, that's very apparent. And I've seen that in a lot of developing world. So that's really where I had a stronger sense of this unfairness of wealth distribution.
Wow. And how old were you when you moved back to Ghana?
I was 6.
Wow. Now, I think what's so interesting is visiting other places and seeing such diverse communities and experiences. It's such a context expander. This idea of what does joy mean? What does happiness mean? What are real needs and wants? It's interesting to have such early international exposure to see differences, and your family, as you were making your way through education and starting to see what was possible for you in grade school, elementary school, going through high school. Were you entrepreneurial? What were some of your initial ways of engaging with yourself and the world around you at a young age?
I would say I was a very obedient child. I would say very aptly described the little girl that I was. Very eager to please. I wasn't bucking trends or trying to go my own way. I just have my sort of recollection of myself within this larger framework of my family, school and society. I did what I was told. It was very much a don't speak unless you're spoken to. And that was the person I was. It's in like stark contrast to the person I am today.
Yes. Very much so. We'll get to some of those inflection points, but very much so. It almost feels as if things were percolating on the inside, but the outside was doing the right thing by one's parents. So when the time came to choose university or decide the next steps for you, was your family very hands-on and Dee, this is the path ahead of you. These are the job opportunities that we think are best for you to prepare for? Or was there any freedom? What was it like for you to think about a future outside of the home?
For me, the first steps of freedom came when I went to university. That was my first time living away from my parents, make decisions for myself, just having the sort of autonomy to make the decisions on a daily basis about what I did, how much I studied or not, and also to see outside the microcosm of my life within my community and to see how other people lived, especially friends who were Western or like had a very sort of, African parents, Ghanaian parents are very strict, very formal. So when I went to university, I really just saw, I've got a sort of global perspective, parents and freedom and autonomy, and had friends who were just sort of very free about whether to do what was required or not. And I hadn't even thought that was a choice. It was immensely liberating for me to see the possibilities, the sort of beginnings, wanting to spark conventions. As a child, I was very good at math and sciences. I was nudged in that direction by my teachers and my parents. And I went to university and I saw creativity, fun and fashion and art and all these other things. And I was intrigued and excited, even though I'd gone to university to study engineering. I ended up rebelling to study math. That was sort of the beginning of saying, okay, I don't want to be an engineer, or, I want to sort of do something that is more free and more artistic.
Wow, I love that. Universities also are now starting to realize we have to have a budget or things cost money and we need to pay for things. Did you have to think twice about where you wanted to go to school or paying for education? Did you have a job or did you have sort of an allowance or stipend, if you will? How did you navigate collegiate finances and figure out what was worth it? What's worth it to spend my money on and what's worth it to not spend my money on?
The great thing about when I went to university was that it was free. In my time, it was free for everybody. College was a right. Education was a right. Something that is embedded in the fabric of a lot of European countries, this idea that access to healthcare, access to education is something every citizen has access to. I didn't have to worry about whether I could afford university because it was just about getting accepted to wherever you wanted to go. But once you were there, your tuition was free. You had to think about where you're going to live and rent, if you're going to live outside of dorms and things like that. And so I would work during the summers. I would work actually at the hospital as an office assistant and pulled files for doctors and nurses and things like that. So I would work, but then when I was back on campus, I focused on studying and had enough to support myself. I think the biggest financial awakening for me was when some credit card companies came to the campus to pitch credit cards for students. I had no idea what a credit card was. I knew what a bank card was. I had no concept of spending money that you didn't already have. And so this idea that I could have this card that had money on it that I could just go and spend. So I applied for one, I got this credit card and just started spending on it. I didn't really think about the paying back of the money. I never spoke to my parents about money. We never talked about money. I don't recall any conversations ever about money or banking or cards or saving or any of that. Like, it just wasn't a conversation that we had. And so got this credit card. I ran up this huge bill. My parents' information's on the card, and they were reached out to because I hadn't paid back the expenses, and all hell broke loose. They were like, what on earth are you doing with this credit card? And I was like, so, they had to pay that off. Then I learned some hard lessons. But that was my first encounter with money and with debt. If you don't talk to your kids about money and the consequences of running up debt and having good credit, and if that's not covered at school, then this is like pre-internet. It wasn't like I was getting books out of the library to read up on finances. So, that's what happened.
Yeah, and I think that is not an uncommon story. I think that this idea that credit card companies can target people who shouldn't have any business having a credit card, that they're targeting them to take out these credit cards, there's something unethical about that, it feels. There needs to be education that's coupled with the confidence and the empowerment and then the access. It's almost similar today when you buy your first home, they make you go through all these online courses to make sure that you understand what it is that you're doing before you buy a house. But yet for a first-time credit card, which is also something that could really devastate your credit, if you will, and so many other components, seems ridiculous that they wouldn't offer education. And so, Dee, moving through university and studying mathematics, but clearly not having a career in mathematics. I would love to start to bridge the gaps here. What happened during university afterwards? How did you decide how you were going to export yourself into the world? And what were the dominoes that fell?
Studying math, I felt sort of limited if I was going to see that through to its natural conclusion, right? So what do you do with a math degree? You're like, you can be an actuary. That's a specific skill set that a math degree helps with, or be an accountant to me. Banking was the most appealing. Major banks that would come to college, recruit. So that was actually how I got my first job offer. But I decided to defer, which is actually very normal in the UK and I think a lot of Europe, that people will take a gap year before starting their first job. Wasn't in a financial position to do that. So I took this job at the time in my 18 to 21-year-old mind. These all made sense. The concept of being creative, doing something more creative was really appealing to me. I just wasn't quite sure how that would happen, but it was really in my mind. And then what happened was I was walking home one day and I walked past this agency I used to go by, fashion, creative agency, and there were always people coming in and out, and it'd be really fun to work here. This was really impulsive. And I just walked in to the building and went to the reception. They said, "We don't have anything right now, but if you're interested in an internship, fill in this form." So I filled in the form and they gave me an internship and I just joined as an intern. It felt very cool. And then within about 3 weeks of working there, a job came up, which was very serendipitous. And so I was like, I'm not going to take the corporate finance job. I'm going to go and work for this company. And so I said yes. And I took the job and gave up the other one impulsively. And it was incredible to be opened up to this other world and way of doing things. So I worked in fashion for a little bit, then realized that it really wasn't for me.
Those are also very different salaries that likely would have been proposed to you. The corporate finance salary, I imagine, was considerably higher than saying, I'm going to go work in fashion. And so for you to make a really distinctive choice and say, I'm going to go for opportunity, something unknown, something that feels exciting, rather than the safer bet, which is let me pursue something in corporate finance. It sounds like a really incredible ways of starting to open up your wings to see what's possible for you. Okay, so the fashion job sucked. So then what happened?
So the fashion job sucks. And I think the point about money, if there's one time in your life where you can put experience and curiosity over money, it's at those early stages of your career. I needed to earn a living, but I didn't have expenses that required me to have a certain salary level. I transitioned from fashion into film. I went into the movie industry, and that was where I found my calling and spent most of my career in the entertainment industry. I worked for an independent movie company in the UK and then was offered a job in America and picked up, moved, came to America. That was back in 2003. And I stayed in the movie industry for a very long time until I became an entrepreneur.
It's incredible, Dee. And so your experiences navigating money during your career, being a woman in entertainment is challenging. You're a smart woman and you advanced nicely. Your titles and levels of excellence seem to keep up with your ambition, securing titles and upward mobility. How were you also approaching things like negotiations of salaries or negotiations of compensation? It sounds like you were sort of learning as you were doing. Did you have peers you talked to? How did you start to approach building career, but also building and managing personal finances?
I don't remember negotiating my salary in the early stages. And I know there are stats around that. Young women negotiating their first or second salaries in a very small percentage compared to men. And I definitely fall into that bracket of just feeling lucky and grateful to get the salaries. You should negotiate regardless. Like, no one's giving you their best offer. You have to negotiate for it. For me, I didn't necessarily know then I could. I thought you apply for a job, they say yes or no, they offer you a salary. Anyway, in my first couple of instances, when I was offered the job to move to America, that's really when I started to really think about packages. And I did speak to other people who had made, because it's a huge jump to move continents for a role. I also had a lawyer to help negotiate my package. which I found much easier than having to do it myself. I spoke to people about how much should I ask for moving costs and where am I going to live for the first few months, how many days of hotel and bonus structure and all of those sorts of things. I learned because I had a lawyer who was like, these are the things that we need to go through. That's the way I sort of figured it out. And then once I was on that path, I understood sort of bullet point negotiation terms and points that I had to look out for myself. I definitely recommend wherever possible to use a lawyer to negotiate. It just really takes the emotion out of it and allows you to feel less personally resentful going into a new role and having to negotiate in a situation where maybe you're not getting what you want. It can be harder if you're not that kind of person who
of course. Self-advocacy is not an easy thing to do.
It isn't. And especially, I think, if you're somebody who also takes things personally, I would say that I am that person. At the end of the day, it's professional. They are there to negotiate on behalf of the company and you're negotiating on your behalf. And you can't take it personally. But I do because it's I'm thinking about what can work.
It's your life. Yeah. I mean, how do you not take your life personally? So in the beginning of your career, obviously living at home is great because not a lot of external things to spend money on. Eventually you move out and have your own flat. To move to any country as an adult, even with assurance of having a job, is still a very high risk decision to make. When you decided to make the big jump and the leap, had you had any savings? Did you have any sort of personal financial security to say, if I get to the States but it doesn't work, I'll be okay for a little bit? How did you sort of reconcile some of the fears or some of the ambiguity with making such a big decision like that?
One of the first things I did when I had my first secure job was I bought a flat. At such a young age, in my early 20s, that was the thing everybody did. I have friends in their 40s or 50s who still rent, but in England, in London, as soon as you were able, you bought property. And that was just a kind of rite of passage. So I owned a flat, which was in a great part of town, which was good, something to fall back on in that regard. But beyond that, I had some savings, not huge nest egg, but I had something. But I wasn't really worried. I felt secure in my ability to get a job. So I wasn't necessarily worried about that. The company paid for all of my expenses to get there. And I was just thinking about the opportunity and the excitement of that. And perhaps I should have been thinking about what happens if this goes wrong. But it was youthful naivete, enthusiasm. I was like, I'm off and this is exciting. And that was really it.
Well, I think that sort of naivete around you just don't know what you're getting into until you get there. I think that's also possibly something that has served you more than once around building and creating. If we knew all the things at the time, would we still do some of these things or do them in the ways that we have? And sometimes the answer is no. So it's kind of incredible to know that there's a sense of optimism, naivete that I think is the learning mindset, right? I don't know what's happening, but it feels right. I'm going to go for it and see what happens. And so moving to the United States, sort of accelerating and advancing even more in your professional life, at what point did it dawn on you that you wanted to take another big risk and become an entrepreneur? A very risky thing to do. It's also something I know, having an immigrant mother, she goes, an entrepreneur, that's like the scariest thing in the whole world because you're not a doctor, you're not a lawyer. So I have my own personal experiences around how family responds to risk, but also it gets internalized. But yet your spirit knows that there's something bigger. You see an opportunity, something calls you. So what was it that called you, and how did you start to prepare yourself financially to become an entrepreneur, and then also emotionally and psychologically?
I had really given myself fully to my jobs. I worked for major conglomerates, these big movie studios that required everything of you. I worked insane hours. I traveled constantly, 3 weeks of every month. I was almost owned by my job. And it was an interesting job, and I think that kept me there for quite a bit of it. You know, I was traveling a lot, but I was going to interesting places, I worked with interesting people. I had a great salary, great perks. The turning point was really, I'd gone on vacation with a friend, and I worked through the holiday, and we had this big blowout. She told me a few truths about friendship, and I really just sort of my lack of availability and care because I was so focused on my job. My job came first. Where it was hard to hear, but it really, I paused, I took stock, and I realized that it was time. That was the turning point. But many things led up to that decision: break the chains and do something else. I thought long and hard about it. They want to try yet another studio, and there was just really like nothing coming to mind. I want to take everything that I've learned and become an entrepreneur. My first iteration of entrepreneurship didn't necessarily work very well, and it's the advice that I give to anyone who's moving from corporate entrepreneurship. I basically started this branded partnerships content agency. I didn't leave my job until I felt secure. I did all the prep, building the website, materials, and everything that I needed.
With what time? Where did this happen, Dee? If you're on the road 3 weeks out of the month, how on earth did you find the time to do this?
Nighttime, I would go work all day, go home, work on it. At night, weekends, that was really how I did it. Once I'd secured I had a couple of clients, and I had an office that was either free or highly subsidized. I felt secure enough to walk away and pursue this entrepreneurship. How that came about, I did not necessarily prepare myself mentally because I didn't really know what was to come. And that was the big shock. Once I was untethered from the industry, I realized that a big chunk of my identity had been ripped away from me. I literally didn't know who I was. I felt very insecure about what I was doing. It all felt like a wild adventure. And then the reality of it felt very different because I realized that all my life I'd worked for these very prestigious organizations. I went to a top university. I worked for these well-known companies. And so I'd always been Dee from somewhere. I always had credentials that anchored me. And then suddenly I was just like, I felt really lost and I felt very insecure. I was living in LA at the time, and LA is not the place where you want to be unimportant.
And to have an identity crisis.
In LA, people love to ask, they want to know what you do really quickly because they just want to know whether to waste any time on you or not. Very cognizant of that. But I was preempting it. I was always like, oh, I'm not important enough. I found myself doing things. I do this now, but I do Y now. I used to do X. Like I was doing all those sorts of things to confer some importance on myself. I remember a friend observed it. She'd seen me in art public. And she said, you just talked yourself out of your value. You did that to yourself. You need to own what you do. You need to communicate that what you do has value.
That's a good friend.
Great friend. We do that for each other to this day. She's my peer coach for life. It was really affecting my ability to even get clients and to negotiate fees. Like one of the hardest things when you work for yourself is what to charge. What are the benchmarks? What are the industry standards? People don't like to tell you. What do I even ask for? I worked for free for lots of people just because I thought, well, I'll just get a foot in the door and then hopefully that'll convert. And so these are all sort of questions. Like it just brought up so many questions around self-worth.
And that's really valuable lesson to learn early because obviously you go on to build a successful, thriving community and business that I get the privilege of being a part of. And so as you started to put the building blocks in place here, it sounds like business grew, and it also sounds like self-worthiness grew at the same time. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes. Well, the business itself, that business failed, but my self-worth grew, even though my business failed. And I think it's something that goes away. It's something that comes back. To come back to again and again. When I'm in spaces where I feel like everyone is more successful, or they have bigger companies, or I see them as carrying more weight than I do in those spaces, I have to sort of come back again and again to, this is my value, this is what I bring. It's useful in this room. I have something that they don't have. They may be the CEO of X Fortune 500 company and I'm not, but this is what I bring is useful to them. And I've had to come back to that conversation over and over in terms of how I negotiate spaces for myself. That initial sort of agency business disbanded, but really kind of morphed into what I'm doing now, which was really what I was meant to be doing. because it was really always my true calling, building community and finding ways for people to be useful for one another, useful to one another. And again, it's like, you never even know what could be a business until it becomes a business. So it wasn't like I thought, I love to put great people together in rooms and help them do business to one another. I didn't think that was a business, but it became a business because I started to see what was happening and the alchemy that was being created.
Your calling was being answered. Yeah.
And the calling was being answered. The pivot from doing these sort of strategic partnerships between companies to strategic partnerships between people, which I didn't necessarily see that was the transition. Then saying, I can charge for this. I remember my husband really encouraged me. So I was hosting these gatherings of smart women, creating these environments. These dinners were getting bigger and bigger. I wasn't charging for them. It was just a hobby. My husband was like, you can charge for this. And I wrote a letter to 75 women. And I said, starting this, set up a club for prominent women in business. This is the speed you'll enjoy. And look, pretty much, it was like a 95% take-up rate.
Alignment. It was like all the doors opened up the moment you got really clear on what it was you were doing.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. And so Dee, as the business has grown and expanded and evolved, your own personal life has evolved. You're a mom, a wife, a daughter, all these identities sort of come together, and the lives that we sort of are externally sometimes translated, sometimes are very different than our internal world and how we sort of manage and do things. And so from an educational standpoint, obviously your young one is very young. How do we talk about money as a family? Having a mom entrepreneur is such an incredible example when it comes to what women are capable of, right? In terms of being able to see the power of strong women in the world. But certainly there are really practical things, like the cost of milk has been going up. Going to the grocery store is expensive. And so as you're sort of navigating internal conversations at home around money, and then obviously building a business, there's a certain point in time where you actually get to then draw a salary, and that can take some time, right? So those things aren't always easy. How have you been managing home personal finances during this incredible rise and scale of the business?
There are so many more considerations that come into play as a family. School and after school and basic sort of household management. One of the things I have in my favor is I'm such a creature of habit. We're almost like we're spending on the same things over and over. I buy the same groceries, we eat at the same places on the same day. Friday is takeout day, Sunday we don't. I just hit repeat on my grocery cart. All of those things have a repeatable nature to them. So the household budget is managed. I think one of the interesting things for me, in contrast to myself, is my son has the internet. He's 12, and he wants to know everything. He has these YouTube people that he loves, like Mr. Beast. He knows how many subscribers Mr. Beast has, and then how much he's making in ad revenue. He understands.
He's a media executive. He's a 12-year-old media executive.
I talked to him just this morning about after-school classes, and I wanted him to do Python. He's been doing programming, and I wanted to advance to Python. And he was like, I really want to do advanced Roblox coding. And I was like, well, Python's just much more useful. He's like, no, I can make money coding on Roblox. Like, if I can do advanced, I can create my own games, and I can charge a 12-year-old kid. Just understood that.
I mean, that's amazing. He's not going to be like, yeah, I made money from the lemonade stand. He's going to be like, I made thousands of dollars from making and selling my video game. That is a whole different level of entrepreneurship. And then also, for a different conversation, pressure. You know, when the world is at your fingertips and you see other 12-year-olds or 10-year-olds doing big things on the internet, it's easy to say, well, I want that. And that kid's younger than me, you're already 12, and you're thinking that your life is short because a 10-year-old has happened to do something impressive. The pressures of being a child are ever increasing and very challenging. So Dee, I know I only have you for a few more minutes, and I feel like I could talk to you 4 hours, but you are an extremely busy woman. Legacy is something we're constantly building in our lives without even realizing it. There are moments where we get a chance to step back, string the dots along, or even take a moment to put ourselves into the future and say, okay, what does the body of work that I'm creating on this planet need? Where is it going? How am I going to make sense of it? Do you have some shots you can share on legacy for you? If you were to look back on your life from a young age of 110 years old because of science, what will the life look like to you? What will legacy have been?
At a basic level, I would like to see a world where there is equal opportunity for women, where women are economically and financially empowered. I want to see women making money and thinking about money and success in the same terms, but in our own way. Beyond women having equal salaries or having packages, flexibility, whatever else they need out of their work lives, I just want to see women in positions of power really affecting policy and benefits the future generation. That's what I would like to see as my legacy, is a world where maybe I no longer need to exist in the same way because we have powerful women advocating for other women in terms that make sense for us. Paid leave or affordable childcare or any of those things, because they're embedded, because women are on the decision-making teams in equal numbers. There's that great quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg when she's asked, how many women need to be on the Supreme Court before you feel it's equitable? And she said, when there are 9. I love that quote. I just want to see Fortune 500 where 70% of those CEOs are women. And I want to see that reflected across business, society, culture. And I think that we can do that. And I think the way that we do that is by communicating and sharing information that we glean with one another. It's why your podcast is important. It's why my community is important. We need to impart the lessons that we're learning and not make assumptions about what people know or don't know.
That's really beautiful, Dee. And then my last 2 questions. One is, money can do so much for us. It can buy our homes. We use it as investing, savings. For most people, it equates to some levels of freedom and security. In my mind, money can also be fun and joyful and fantastic. What are some of your most favorite ways to spend money?
Oh, gosh, I love to spend money. And what I mean by that is there are people who hoard things or save things. And obviously I have savings and responsible, but I also love to live. I want to live in the moment. Use the good stuff. But what we have this one life, it's the living life. I think it's really important to live. I love to spend money on experiences. As a family, we love to travel. I love to spend money on exploring the world, being in other places, experiencing other cultures, especially with my child. I love to see him wide-eyed, connecting with how other people live. I think it's so important. So I would say that's definitely one way that I love to spend money. I started in fashion. I definitely love clothes and those sorts of things because it's really how I express myself. I feel more confident when I'm expressing myself in the way that I want to. So it's less about just material things, but more about sort of self-expression and feeling good in what I'm wearing, how I'm presenting. It's really real armor. So I would say those are the 2 ways in which I love to see the moment. Yes.
Well, you have great style, and I love seeing your vacation photos. Lastly, Dee, this community likes to rally around the women on the show. And so my ask for you is, what is it you're calling in right now? What do you need, and how can we support you?
Oh, excellent. So I'm always in hiring mode. Whoever's listening, send good people my way. I'm interested in finding mission-led people who care about what I do. When you have a business like mine, it's so important not just to have people who bring the skill set, but passion. I think I've made the mistake in the past of hiring for the skill or hiring because I was impressed by the resume. But actually the best people have been the ones who were just excited by what we're building. Send great marketers, a membership director, great salespeople, send those people my way.
Amazing. Fantastic, Dee. You are a brilliant woman. I'm grateful to be in community with you. Thank you for building such a powerful group of women and for evangelizing the things that will make society and the world a better place to live in and to be in. And thank you for your vulnerability and sharing your stories today. I'm grateful to have you.
Thank you so much. I actually learned a lot about myself in having this conversation. It's been pretty interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Getting Rich Together. Please take a minute to subscribe. And if you like this episode, I'd love it if you could share it with a friend who is ready to elevate their financial future. Until next time, let's keep getting rich together.